This week on Cosmic Sponge, we look into the new owner of Skinwalker Ranch, discuss alien abduction insurance, and then we go down under to explore one of the largest mass UFO sightings in modern history. And now, a brief announcement from our local Australian cultural attaché.
G'day, mates. Might be a bit of misinformation from these two drongos on today's episode, and I'm here to clear it up. We don't put shrimp on the barbie, we call them prawns. We put prawns on the barbie. A dingo will not eat your baby unless you douse him in barbie sauce and drop him off in the outback for an arvo. And not every Australian loves Vegemite, and those that do, eat it sparingly. Not as a main course, but rather as a light spread on some toast. But that Westall UFO? That's fair dinkum, mate. I'm heading off to grab an atlas for these two dags. I have a strong feeling they're gonna need it. Stick around, it's gonna be a ripper.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders of the world. I'm Jimmy Coe.
And this is Stephen Hawk. Tonight, we have a very special episode for you.
It is special because it's the first time we go outside of a domestic case.
We go on down under.
We're going down
to Australia. Throw it through shrimp on the barbie. Hey.
Tango ate my baby.
You know what? We probably lost our one Australian listener with that terrible accent I had.
No, you did great, man. You know the toilets swirl backwards down there?
No, they don't. They twirl in the same direction. Just you're looking at it upside down.
What?
Yeah.
You just blew my mind.
Well, the reason that the toilet swirls is because of the Earth's rotation. The Earth's always in motion. So us in the northern hemisphere see it going a certain direction. It's going in the same direction. It's just relative to how you're viewing it. It looks backwards because you're looking at it upside down, literally. It's still going in the same direction.
Yeah. Have you ever had Vegemite?
I have not. I've been very curious about Vegemite.
I'm going to get some.
It's some kind of like black pasty stuff because I ride motorcycles. I listen to some adventure travel motorcycles, and one of the shows I listen to has a couple of Australians on it, and they travel around the world and everything. It's a man and wife couple. And they said every time they travel somewhere, they take their Vegemite with them because they like it. And everybody's always like, let me try it. Can I try it? And they're like, no, you can't try it because I only have so much and everybody else hates it. Unless you're from Australia, apparently you have to be Australian to appreciate it, I guess.
Or from New Zealand, which is like Australia light, right?
The same thing, right? Same difference. Flag's the same and everything, just the stars are moved around a little bit.
It's essentially the same country. It's easier for me to remember as an American,
And now we lost our one New Zealand, or any potential New Zealand listeners we may have.
No, they understand that we're bad at geography over here.
You're bad at geography.
Well, fair enough.
I was making a joke. So Jimmy, let me ask you something. What has been going on in the world of UFOs and other weird wonders of the world?
I'm going to go with a weird wonders instead of exclusively UFOs. It includes UFOs. Have you heard of a Skinwalker Ranch?
I have. Who hasn't?
Well, there might be some folks out there who haven't heard of Skinwalker Ranch.
If you're listening to this podcast, I think odds are you have heard of Skinwalker Ranch.
But if you haven't,
or
maybe you're bad at geography like me and you had to look it up, it's about a 512-acre ranch out in Utah. And it used to be owned by Robert Bigelow for quite a while. He's the hotel mogul, also has that aerospace company, and he's into researching UFOs and other weird wonders of the world. He sold it a while back to somebody who remained anonymous. But, well, this person has come out, and he had an interview recently, which I posted on our Facebook page, and his name is Brandon Fugal. He's a real estate mogul. The reason he came out to the world is because he went in with a contract with the History Channel, which no longer does history. They do all kinds of things like ancient aliens and UFOs now.
That is history, man.
That is history.
I'm glad to see somebody's taking it seriously.
That's right.
Just like us.
Right, exactly. History of weird wonders of the world. And
Yeah, who's going to be laughing whenever they land? That's all I'm saying. Whenever they reveal themselves, we'll be the ones going, see, told ya.
Well, I'm the skeptic, so I'll be going, oh, I was wrong, man.
Guess I was wrong.
Cool. Sweet.
Then we'll be out of a job.
That's fine. We'll find something else. I mean,
we'll just speculate about what they're really doing. There'll still be a government cover-up because they won't be telling us what they're up to.
Well, our insect overlords are going to need some of us for slaves to harvest, the others for food. So, I mean, sign me up. Anyway, we've got...
For food?
For the harvester. Come on.
Oh.
Who'd want to eat me? So,
I don't know, man.
insect overlords.
Let's continue with Skinwalker Ranch. What do you say?
Right. So the Skinwalker Ranch, he goes on to talk a little bit about it in the interview, and he does a lot of really cool things in terms of talking about they're continuing this research they've been doing there under Bigelow. They're just continuing that with a new research team, and that research team is the same team that they brought onto camera. They didn't hire like actors or anything like that. So it's a reality show with real researchers doing work there on Skinwalker Ranch. I haven't seen any of the episodes, so I can't tell you whether it's good or not, but it looked interesting and maybe it would be something you'd want to watch. It was a hit first season, which they just wrapped up, and they're working on the second season now. That might be something you guys want to check out on the History Channel. And I get no money for this, so...
I've heard there's all kinds of really strange things that happen there. It's on. I swear I heard someone say if it exists in paranormal, it happens at Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, scientists and stuff have apparently left in the middle of the night and everyone. I mean, it's apparently and evidently and astonishingly a very, very strange place.
So the ranch itself is completely surrounded by Native American lands ran by the Ute people, UTE, I'm pretty sure it's Ute. And they take it very seriously because there's a fence around the property, and the Native American tribe members will come out and take body parts of animals and put them on the fence, like livers and bladders and like skin and all kinds of stuff. And that is to keep the paranormal stuff inside the ranch and not to creep out onto the reservation. They don't even look in the direction of the, they tell their kids and stuff, don't even look in the direction because something might follow you back home.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's really weird.
They take it seriously, man.
Well, how would you like to wake up and your neighbors like putting dead animal parts on the fence between you and your lot in suburbia?
Whoa, you locked up, baby.
We're keeping the bad stuff in there, buddy. I wonder if anyone would bring that up in homeowners association. Wasn't it Robert Frost that said good fences make good neighbors?
That sounds right. Let's
the
go
American
with that.
Poet.
Yeah.
I've got one here for you.
Shoot.
So the Pew Research Center did a survey. This was right before the 4th of July weekend.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you the percent of U.S. adults who say their best guess is that intelligent life exists on other planets. Now, I was going to say over 10,000 people were surveyed with this. But anyway, what do you guess? How many Americans believe there's intelligent life on other planets?
Let's say 75%.
Not bad, 65%. 34 says does not, and I'm trying to think who those guys would be. Now, we're not talking about UFOs here. We're just saying that intelligent alien life exists somewhere besides the Earth.
Yeah,
that's pretty egocentric to think nowhere else in the billions and billions of stars and planets in the entire universe, trillions and trillions, more than you could fathom to count.
I would imagine probably some fundamental religions probably don't
allow you to believe that.
Allow you to believe that. I mean, I grew up in a church that was like that.
So 2% refused to answer. I find that weird.
Well, those are just people who are suspicious. Those are the guys who have like 10,000 guns in their basement and they eat paste on the weekends to prepare for the end of the world.
I'm not answering that.
I'm not answering anything.
Where's the cameras?
I know you're filming me.
I saw that black helicopter. It didn't have any markings on it.
Rufus, come and bite this guy.
All right, so the next question was the percent of U.S. adults who say the UFOs reported by people in the military are blank evidence of intelligent life outside of Earth. So it's definitely, probably not, definitely not. 11% said definitely, probably, 40%, probably not, 36%, 11% said definitely not, and 2% again refused to answer the question.
I refuse to answer that question because it's a bad question.
Percent of U.S. adults who say UFOs are what to U.S. national security? 51% said not a threat. 36% said a minor threat. A major threat was 10%. And 3% refused to answer that question. Yeah, it was 10,417 U.S. adults. I would love to know, listeners, I know we have quite a few international listeners. Let me know what it looks like in your country. Have there been any surveys? How many people believe in intelligent life? How many people believe UFOs proves the existence of extraterrestrials? I'd love to know some of that. I'd like to know how your governments treat reports of UFOs. So what else you got?
Nothing really. I would just be interested to know how many people in Australia think that the aliens are venomous.
All right, Jimmy, I got a question for you before we get started on tonight's main topic.
Sure.
Have you ever thought that you maybe have been abducted by an alien?
Never.
Just never.
Never.
Let's just say, if that ever started happening to you, would you look for anything to help you out, like outside of your family and friends and psychiatric care and that sort of thing? Well, for instance, what I'm getting at, did you know that you can buy alien abduction insurance? I bet you didn't know that.
Well, yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
How much is it?
Well, there's a company in Latin America somewhere, maybe Mexico, called elcerto.com.
El Certo. Do you have to get abducted in the country of where your insurance is?
I'm not sure. You probably have to read the fine print, but it does have some policies that protect you if you one day are abducted by aliens.
How do you prove it? Do you have to bring back proof?
I'm getting to that. Hold on.
Oh, okay. I didn't mean to jump ahead.
Alien abduction insurance is a product designed to cover the insured's family in the event of being abducted by aliens, although they also include some other services. They work like normal insurance, paying a monthly premium and would last a lifetime. According to sources, it cost about 350 pesos. I don't know, what is that, like $5?
It's like
I have no idea what a peso is.
$5.60. I don't know.
Or when our Mexican listener.
Man, you insult everybody.
I know, that's your job.
Shut up.
So included in the coverage is psychiatric assistance, protection against public derision, and even compensation for your family if the alien eats you. Well, that's in the article. I didn't write that.
Did you say the alien eats you?
What it said.
How do you prove that? If you show up in some alien stool? I don't know. Where do you find this stuff?
It says in the fine print, if you're kidnapped by aliens but returned to Earth, you would have to have proof of the kidnapping in some form with an alien signature or something similar.
How can I sell that insurance? I can make some money.
I don't know. You need to be careful. There's a London-based firm that has sold more than 30,000 alien abduction insurance policies throughout Europe, but it says you need to provide proof of occurrence to file a claim. There's an insurance policy also. It insured its staff. It was an insurance company at the Falcon Hotel, Royal Falcon Hotel in Lowestoft, England. And they insured its staff and customers against death and disability caused by ghosts, poltergeists, and other abnormal phenomenon. Just saying.
So $1 is equivalent to 19.88 Mexican pesos.
So what's that come out to? 350 pesos.
350 pesos is going to be $17.61.
Yeah, I wasn't too far. I said $5, didn't I? Okay.
That's a bit far off.
You were saying you would like to figure out a way to make money. You said, hey, how can I sell this insurance? Well, you got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
Good fellow Rebecca Ingrams Pearson from London was selling a insurance. It says 2,700 pesos per year, but it stopped doing it whenever almost 40 subscribers to this insurance died suddenly in 1997. Do you know what that was?
No, 1997. What happened in 1997 that a bunch of people die suddenly? I don't know.
The Heaven's Gate cult. I am not kidding you. 39 members of the Heaven's Gates cult had paid $1,000 on October 10th for a policy that covered up to 50 members, and it would pay out $1 million a person per abduction, impregnation, or death caused by aliens.
Technically, death by aliens.
Yeah. And if you recall, the Heaven's Gate cult was 39 people in California. I think they were in California.
Of course they were.
That were, now there goes, see... Now we've lost all of our listeners to California. So the Heaven's Gate cult, there was a comet coming by Earth in the 90s called the Hale-Bopp comet in 97. And the Heaven's Gate cult believed that this was some type of UFO and would take them all off to explore the universe or something. Not sure exactly what their belief system was, but at any rate, they had a mass suicide when it reached its closest point to Earth, I believe. But I do know they had a mass suicide, so 39 members of the cult. I don't know. It doesn't say anywhere in the article whether they actually paid it out or not.
They probably went bankrupt.
And they said Lloyd's of London has like 60,000 alien abduction policies. Isn't that crazy? Well, I mean, not crazy, but isn't that astonishing?
I would have went with crazy, but astonishing's fine too. And there goes the rest of our listeners.
Sorry, listeners. I don't mean any disrespect to someone who's been abducted. I'm saying that I'm surprised that insurance companies offer the insurance, is what I'm getting at. I found that to be astonishing.
Well, having some experience with insurance companies, I would say that it is not astonishing at all because those dudes crunch the numbers. They have very sophisticated models. They know where they're going to make a buck.
Oh, yeah. And then they just try not to pay you like they did on my auto accident.
Or on my kid's teeth.
They'll cheat you out of your money if they can. Sorry if there's any insurance agents out there.
If there were, there's not any listening to this
anymore. The truth hurts. But yeah, I'd say they all require some type of...
We should probably skip news from now on because we're kicking all of our listeners off left and right. Nobody in California, nobody in Australia, nobody in New Zealand, nobody in Canada.
Nobody from Mexico.
Not even Canada
or Latin America
wants to listen. I'm not listening to you, eh? Getty, come back.
They're when our two Canadian listeners, man.
Getty, Alex, come back. Please listen. Yeah, so that's weird. Heaven's Gate, insurance, pesos to dollars.
Anyway, let's move on to tonight's main topic. As we had stated earlier, we are going down under to the land of Australia. In April of 1966, there was a mass UFO sighting at the School of Westall and had something like 200 plus witnesses that we know about. There was probably more. The students all ran outside and saw some UFOs. Some of the teachers saw them, and then there seemed to be a very quickly organized government cover-up to follow. And Jimmy, I'm pretty sure you've done the legwork on this one. So, do you want to give us a rundown of what happened at Westall in 1966?
Okay, I'll give it a go. It was, by all accounts, a typical April day at Westall High School, located in a small suburban community of Clayton, Victoria. Around 11 o'clock a.m., Andrew Greenwald, the science teacher, was wrapping up a class when a young student entered the room, exclaiming something about a flying saucer in the sky. Outside, a physical education class was well underway under the watchful eye of Jeanette Meir. Students had suspended a game of cricket to stare at the seemingly odd craft in the sky to the south. Greenwald recounts that about half of the approximately 600 students which attended the school were already in the oval by the time he arrived. I had to look this up. In Australia, an oval is a sports ground that's designed for cricket and Australian rules football, taking its name, of course, from its shape. The morning 15-minute class recess had also just begun. That, coupled with the UFO rumors spreading like wildfire, assured that a large audience was there for the sighting. At first, Greenwald was unable to make out anything in the sky, that is, until a student pointed it out to him. A silver cigar-shaped object about the size of 1.5 sedans was moving erratically about a quarter mile away in the sky to the south. Soon the object was joined by 5 light aircraft, perhaps Cessnas. It darted about the sky as the plane seemingly attempted to capture it in a cat-and-mouse-like game. Its movements were faster than what would be considered conventional, and it avoided the planes with ease. At one point, the object descended just beyond the trees which separated the school from an open field of the Grange. The Grange being an area of woods and fields utilized by the cross-country running team and occasionally gathering of students for unsupervised socialization. Within a minute or so of disappearing behind the pines, it ascended and zipped away in the sky at a substantial speed. While the students at Greenwald were left wondering what they had seen, the bell rang to signal the end of morning recess. Some students were slow to return to class, and the event, having caused a significant stir in the student body, led to disruptions. Before the end of the day, both the news agency as well as, according to some, the local police would show up to explore exactly what had occurred. During a special assembly at lunchtime, new headmaster Frank Sobelby, a by-the-book man, and as such determined to maintain order in the school, instructing the students to disregard the incident and not talk about it with anyone. Staff were also instructed not to propagate the story in the community by discussing it either with reporters or on the school grounds. Greenwald and many many of the students would recount the experience over the years with some elaboration over time. Even going back to the earliest reports, there were different accounts of the incident when it was discussed, and it is difficult to determine what precisely occurred. In large part, the mystery behind the event is due mainly to two factors: the headmaster's decision to enforce a wall of silence and a significant lack of information from any official government agency. Nonetheless, everyone agrees something happened on that day which was extraordinary enough to endure over 50 years.
A couple of things I wanted to ask you about as you were going through that.
Sure.
I've heard some accounts that they were maybe 3 objects.
That's true. Depending on which student you ask, there was 3, 2, or 1 object. Some students only saw 1, some saw 2, some saw 3.
I know the one object for sure was hovering over a really large high voltage electrical tower. Now, not just a little wooden telephone pole, but one of those large high tension wires that, with the trellis frame. It was hovering there, according to some of the witnesses, had turned sideways and just made all these very strange movements. And now all of them seem to agree with that. One of the objects, at least one, went down to the Grange, and that's sort of a wooded area close to the school, and went down in the trees. And a bunch of the students, several of the students, some of the girls, some of the boys, jumped over the fence and ran down there to see it. Some of them saw it very closely. Now, there's something I want to bring up here. There is a documentary. You can find it on YouTube as of right now, as we're recording this. It's called Westall 66.
Yeah, so the documentary was funded and filmed by Rosie Jones, the individual that they had do the actual interviewing of the various people involved in the sighting. The presenter was Shane Ryan, who is an English teacher at a local college, I believe. He stayed on top of this over the years, for quite a number of years, actually.
Shane Ryan was interviewing more than one of the witnesses, and they said there was one of the young girls, her name was Tanya. I know nothing about a last name. And they said that she ran down there before anyone else got there, and something happened to her. She passed out, was taken away in an ambulance, and never returned to school again. And I was a little disappointed that documentary, that Westall 66, never one time tries to follow up on what happened to that girl, which is a very strange mystery, don't you think?
Well, yes. If you just watch the documentary, it is a strange mystery, but I did a little bit more digging.
So I do want to mention one other thing before we get to what you found. Well, I was watching another show on YouTube right now. If you bring up Westall 66, you can see it. It lasts about 15 or 20 minutes. It has some of the same witnesses, some of the women that were there, and the filmmaker, Shane Ryan. They mentioned that again, only it was a different witness that had said this girl, Tanya, I think, than mentioned it in the documentary. She claims that she went to the girl's house after this happened the very next day, and they said, "I'm sorry, you're mistaken. No one by Tanya lives here." That's what she said on the interview, which I find very odd. Now, what did you find out about this girl? Or have you found out anything on it?
There are 2 witnesses that are in the documentary that are also on a various number of news programs after the documentary, even up to the 50th anniversary, which was a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. Both of them claim to have been with Tanya on that day at the time that they ran toward the Grange in an attempt to see what was landing on the other side of the pine trees. The first person I want to talk about is Jackie Argent. She was with Tanya. They ran down to the Grange. Tanya was ahead of her, along with another girl that I wasn't able to determine exactly who that was. There are different accounts of what went down there, slight differences. One person said when they got there, Tanya was uncontrollably hysterical and the other girl had fainted on the ground. Another account said that Tanya came running back from the Grange, crying and screaming, and the other girl had fainted or was crying and screaming at the thing. So there was a lot of just miscommunication or bad communication or people remembering things differently. Now, Jackie Argent said that when Tanya returned to the school, she fainted at the school and then was taken away in an ambulance, and that was the last time she ever saw her. Jackie used to go over to her house. It was a migrant school, meaning primarily that the people going to that school were from a migrant community. there was a large number of Brits coming over and Europeans that were coming into Australia during that time. They had this policy where they were trying to bring a lot of people into Australia. So you had Tanya, and her parents couldn't speak English.
They were Yugoslavian.
So when Jackie went over to her house to see her the very next day, so that would have been on April 7th, 1966, there was an English-speaking woman in the house who claimed that there was no Tanya that had ever lived there, and that was the last that Jackie had ever seen of her. Some researchers tracked Tanya down. She lives in Sydney by all accounts. She wants to remain anonymous and doesn't want to get involved in this in any way, shape, or form. So there's a Facebook group page where a lot of the people who went to Westall during that time and researchers will get on there and discuss the events. There was one student during that time who made a mention that Tanya was a little bit of a wild child, but wouldn't follow up on that. And there was another discussion that perhaps she went into a convent, or that her family had sent her to a convent.
I heard that too on that news program that I watched. Yeah.
So there's a lot of mystery still surrounding Tanya. That is probably the clearest thing to point to about the massive amount of confusion and conflicting reports that are wrapped around this whole story, because you're getting presumably 200 students, ages 12 to 16, who are telling their version of the story 50 years removed from the event.
Right. Well, I mean, keep in mind, they probably recounted this many times during their lives to friends and family. Typically, when we see an interview, I mean, I got on YouTube and found a lot of different interviews through the years, and it was typically the same 4 or 5 people that they were interviewing. And they were also prominent in the documentary as well. So one of my favorite interviews is the one with Andrew Greenwood. In the movie The Phenomena, he stays anonymous. He stays hidden from view, but he's interviewed by James Fox, the filmmaker. And he talks about how it moved. One of the things that he says is, in all my experience and all my years and all my scientific training, I've never been able to explain what I saw. But more interestingly, now everyone agrees that within 30 minutes of this encounter, police start to arrive, and then at some time after that, the military arrives, the press arrives, word starts getting out. The police start running the press off, even though they had interviewed 1 or 2 people. And as Jimmy had said earlier, they had this big assembly. The headmaster of the school said, "You are not to talk about this. You didn't see anything. It wasn't anything but a balloon. And if you do talk about it, you're in big trouble." And you can find a newspaper article where Andrew Greenwood did give a statement about what he saw. Well, a few days after that, he says that 2 men came to see him, one in uniform. They asked him to recount his story. And so he tells them everything that he saw. And then after he's done, they said, "You didn't see anything. And if you said you did, you were probably drunk. And we would have to report that to whatever their equivalent is of the school board, and you would be fired." And so from that point on, he's never been willing to come forth or to be identified until very recently.
Not true.
Well, I was going to say it's on our Facebook page because he finally decided to come forward and reveal his identity, because he refused to talk. And I do know that he didn't, he was approached for the Westall 66 documentary, and he did not come forward and speak. I mean, you may be able to look up something he said back in the day when it happened, because he did do an interview with the newspaper back then. But in recent years, he hasn't wanted to talk about it until very, very recently. In fact, the story's still on our Facebook page when he come forward, revealed who he was and all that. So what are you saying not true?
Well, I find a few things about today's Andrew Greenwood a little suspicious from the 1966-67 Andrew Greenwood. So recently, not so recently, but probably in the last 10, 15 years maybe, there was an American physicist and meteorologist who was prominent in the time who took an interest in UFOs. And he went to Australia and as part of some research program with the government. In his spare time, he would go around and interview people who had been involved in sightings or incidents of UFOs. His name was James E. McDonald. He's a physicist and meteorologist. psychologist, no slouch. One of his degrees was from MIT. A serious scientist by all accounts. Someone went through his papers in Arizona, located a taped interview that he did with Andrew Greenwood in 1967, a year after the event occurred. Maybe a little over a year, because if I remember correctly, it was in May of 1967. That interview is very telling in terms of getting as close to the event as possible and having a clear understanding of what Andrew Greenwood at least saw in his experience. And he sounds very matter of fact. He doesn't seem to embellish in any way, shape, or form. So Andrew's story is essentially, in a quick summary, he's in his classroom teaching. A young female student runs into the room, exclaims that there's a flying saucers in the sky. He doesn't immediately just jump and run outside. He's like, okay, this girl's maybe a little bit excitable and stuff. Recess is going to happen in just a minute or two. Let's everyone settle down, and then we'll go out and check to see what's happening. So the bell rings. They go outside. He joins what he says is approximately half of the student body, so approximately 200 to 300 students. They actually have to point it out to him. It's a gray background sky, low clouds, gray clouds. They have to point it out to him, but he can clearly see it once they point it out to him. It's pretty far away. He says maybe a quarter mile away in the sky. So it's relatively small. And then it descends below some pine trees in an area they call the Grange, meaning it came closer to the school from the south and lowered behind the trees. And then it came back up and then engaged these 5 light aircraft in a cat and mouse sort of chase. And then when he looked away and looked back, it wasn't there anymore. And he couldn't remember exactly what had happened to the planes, as if he lost interest and walked away or didn't care about the planes. The really important piece of the story for him, I imagine, was this unusual object in the sky. And that's pretty much all he had to say about it. It sounded really quite mundane. He did say, though, that it looked as if it was a cylinder in a ratio of probably in height 1 to length 4 or 5. And then he said sometimes it looked like it got wider, as if it turned on its side and you were seeing the bottom of it maybe, and then turned back. So it got bigger and then smaller in the middle. And that's pretty much all he said. And now you can get, and we'll put this on our Facebook page and on YouTube. I'll put a link to his interview so you can listen to it yourself and come up with your own sense of what he's saying and try to fit it into the narrative. But it seems to me, Andrew at least, didn't see anything particularly for me that would be exciting or unusual. He did say that the cat and mouse, and that's how he described it, game that it seemed to be playing with the light aircraft was extraordinary only in the sense of it appeared to move much faster than the aircraft, and the aircraft were not able to keep up with it, capture it, or quickly follow it and keep up with it. So I think that's probably the one extraordinary thing. Now, in terms of the teachers that saw it on the playground, he only mentions 2 other possible teachers, and that is Jeanette Meir. She was the physical education teacher, so she would have been the first to have seen it, but she had already passed away by the time the documentary was done, so no one was able to interview her to get her sense of what went on. The other teacher that was there was English teacher, and his name was Claude Miller. In the documentary, he mentions that he knew he had to get his coffee or tea. I think coffee is what he said. And he went to go get his beverage of choice, whatever it was, and light up a cigarette. And by the time he made it outside, there wasn't much to see. Andrew approached him and asked him if he saw this amazing thing in the sky. That's what he remembered. Don't know that he ever saw anything.
Yeah, all he remembers was Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher, coming up to him and saying, "Did you see it?" And that's really all he can remember. Now, there was one witness that said there was a chemistry teacher there, and she had a camera. This witness, now it wasn't the chemistry teacher saying this, but he said it was the chemistry teacher had taken quite a few pictures, and he remembers a man in uniform and
the headmaster
wanting to take her camera, not just the film, but take the camera.
Right, that was Graham Simmons. He was the school captain. That's a student's given a bit of a prominent position within the school to make sure that the younger students were corralled into the school after recesses if they were lagging behind, and to walk the halls to make sure that everyone was in their classrooms before he went off to class. He says that he saw, as he was walking back to class on that day, Miss Robbins, that's Barbara Robbins, had her camera confiscated by the headmaster, Frank Sobelby, and there was also with him a uniformed police officer, is the way he remembers it. Shane Ryan was able to get in touch with Barbara before she passed away, but by the time he gets in touch with her, she is in pretty poor health and says that she doesn't remember very much of anything that went on during that time in her life. So we don't get any clarification from her whether or not she even took pictures or if her camera was confiscated. We get no verification of that. All we have is someone claiming that she did take the pictures, and who that was, I wasn't able to find. I did find Graham Simmons saying the camera was confiscated on that day by a police officer and the headmaster. And that was all I could find.
So where we're at right here, they said that there's at least 200 students ran out, saw this flying saucer. Some of them say it was more than one. I know I heard one of the students say that there were actually two that were landed in the grass.
There is one student, I believe he was featured in the documentary. His name was Victor Zachary. His recollection, he's very matter of fact about it, that in a paddock next to the school, not over in the Grange. We'll talk a little bit about the distance between the school and the Grange in a minute, because I think that's an important piece of the story, and I want to take into account another teacher's account of the entire incident and her perceptions of it, and how maybe that plays into maybe a more mundane approach that was taken at the time, and explain why there was this wall of silence that went up around the school. But Victor says that there was a fence, a rather tall fence, and on the other side of that fence, where there's now a road, there was a grassy paddock, and in that grassy paddock there was two of these saucers that had landed. His intention was to be an artist once he graduated, so he did some diagrams from that period, which are pretty nice and give a very specific view of what those saucers look like. They don't look like your traditional saucer, but close. He claims that him and three other students had jumped the fence. He was on one side, and the other three students were opposite him by the other craft, and he was close enough to almost touch it and chose not to touch it. They rise up into the sky. One heads over to the Grange. The other one goes away somewhere else at a rapid speed. The one that goes over by the Grange then falls behind the pine tree. So this is something that was really difficult for me. Trying to put together a timeline for these events, I went and looked for people who try to put together a timeline. It's really difficult. There are so many different stories that came out of this that place everything at different times and in different locations. So the best I could come up with is this. Andrew Greenwood, in his 1967 interview, said that it was about 10:20 when they had their morning tea time, and that was about the time that everything occurred. So it was closer to about 10:30 that everything was going down rather than 11 o'clock. So it starts with the physical education class that's going out on the oval. They are the first ones to see it, as well as a couple of students that are south-facing of the school. This includes Graham Simmons, the school captain, who was in a chemistry class at the time, sees a UFO, and at that time they were flying low over the school, and I think that's when they went over to the paddock that Victor is talking about and landed. If we are to believe the case that there are three of these things in the sky, then at least two of them land, one of them still in the sky somewhere. Victor then goes over and sees it, and then those two rise up. Then one goes over by the Grange and the other one goes away. So at this point, there's only one in the sky. It goes down, comes back up, and then it's chased about the sky by 5 light aircraft. At this point, Andrew Greenwood comes into the picture and sees it. It goes behind the pines again, maybe, and that's when the students run to the Grange to go view it. And that includes just a handful of girls. I couldn't find any case where any boys went. It's just the case where 3 girls claimed they went. And I could only find a case where it was 3 girls.
Only the witnesses, though.
Correct.
Is the way I took it. I mean, they showed some pictures of some boys jumping over the fence and some other students.
Right, but right.
I've assumed there's more. There's probably some that just don't want to talk about it.
So the 3 girls go to the Grange. Now, the Grange is a quarter a mile away from the school. So you can get on Google Maps, look at the distance, compare the map to the 1967 map. There's been some changes, obviously, with development, but you can get a sense of the distance. So those girls would have had to ran a quarter mile to the Grange to see this thing that went down below it and then presumably landed or hovered really close to the ground. and created this nest. And when we say nest, that is an area of this long grass that had been swirled into a flattened state. And some say that
like
was
a crop circle.
like a crop
perfectly
circle.
round crop circle.
And there are pictures of it that you can see from the original
That's
event.
right.
Online, and it is pretty neat looking, to be sure. There are other people who were in the area on that side of the Grange that came forward, including some people who were working on the local farms, packing fruit and preparing them to ship to the market, who witnessed this and witnessed students bursting through the wooded area into that field by the farm, where they ran across the farm area, which was private property, and they were not sure whether they should or not, but decided, we're going to brave it and do it. And they ran across into another wooded area and then on to presumably where this craft had come down. Once everything had settled down and they had corralled all the students back into the school, the headmaster, now this was his first year at this school, and it was a migrant school, only in the sense of that the majority of the people that went to this school were in basically the boonies for that area at that time. And he was a by-the-book headmaster, and he didn't want this stuff to disrupt the students' lessons. That's his primary concern. So he holds a special assembly. Usually they have one in the morning and one in the afternoon. He holds a lunchtime assembly and tells all the students, no, this is all nonsense. I don't want to hear any more of this stuff. Knock it off. We're going to focus on our lessons. You're not to talk about this anymore. And as an authoritarian figure, that seemed to work really well, because there was a wall of silence that came up around the school, and it was even reported as such in the local newspaper.
And I think that also the teachers were instructed to make sure the students weren't too focused on this or even talking about it at all. And they were essentially forbidden to talk to the news. And I know one girl said she got in trouble, or woman now, but she got in trouble because she gave an interview to News Channel 9. Now, here's another thing that emerged from the documentary. Shane Ryan goes to the TV station because this lady says, I was interviewed by Channel 9.
Oh, can we back up there for just a second?
Sure.
Just to keep the timeline going here, there are two girls that got permission from a senior teacher to go off campus. They walked down to a local shop, two of the local shops that were nearby, and called the news station to report that this had gone down. And that's how the news station had gotten wind of it and came to the school to see if they could get an interview from the students.
And they said the area was cordoned off by the authorities, whether it was police. They claimed some military, some men showed up in camouflage. Some say it was American military, U.S. military there. I don't know. Maybe. So anyway, back to Shane Ryan. In the documentary Westall 66, he says, okay, so I'm going to go down to Channel 9 and find that archival footage. So he gets the number, goes into their archives, finds the can that the film would be in, opens the can, and of course, it's empty. The film is missing. Add a little mystery to that. My guess is some UFO researcher neglected to return it through the 50 years since this incident. That's exactly the first thing. I did not think government cover-up or Air Force personnel came in and collected it or any clandestine. I'm saying most likely somebody that was doing a documentary on the 30th anniversary or the 25th anniversary or the 10th anniversary probably decided not to return the film and keep it. That's my guess. But that's pure speculation.
Yeah, so this gets a little interesting too. So a Channel 9 journalist, now that was the channel that did the interview, the film footage that's missing.
The girl.
With the girls.
Yeah.
This Channel 9 journalist told Shane Ryan recently that a government minister had requested that owner, Sir Frank Packer, based in Sydney, remove the footage from the news archives.
Oh, well.
So who knows if that's true, but
Well, the plot thickens.
the plot does indeed.
Maybe it is a government cover-up. Well, it does seem that the government wanted to keep it quiet, to cover it up. Not sure if it goes back to Robertson panel, kind of demystifying UFOs. Let's not get hysterical. Let's keep it tamped down. If that's at work here, or if something really did happen there, which is so many witnesses, it does seem that something happened, and it did leave trace evidence. The swirly patterns in the grass. After it was all said and done, I mean, something seems to have set down in that field. So another thing Andrew Greenwood, the teacher we spoke about earlier, claimed in the Phenomenon film that, again, they threatened to say, hey, you were drunk on duty, so we'll have to have you fired from your teaching position. And they said if he did talk about it even after that, that they would prosecute him under the Secrets Act. which I guess is something Australia has.
Right.
Any other weirdness, any other stuff you need to bring up about this before we start kind of looking at the other side of the coin, the old skeptical side of the coin? Because the skeptic stories really, to me, are, well, let's just save it for that.
I've got a good one for that. But anyway, there are just a few additional points that are maybe interesting. Government documents show that on that day, a very high-level individual from the Department of Supply was dispatched to Westall. And I want you to remember that, the Department of Supply, okay?
Kind of like Materials Command, General Twining, the Australian equivalent.
Yeah, they're part of the Department of Manufacturing Industry, I think. That's one interesting thing. The other is that there was a report of 5 to 7 light aircraft in the air that day. Now, the closest airport is about 3.25 miles to the south of the school. They didn't report any aircraft in the air up towards the school operating. They had about a dozen craft take off, one continental flight, and then the other dozen flights or so were doing bump and, what did they call it? I thought this was pretty funny. I had to look it up. The other craft were on what's called circuits and bumps, training flights to the southeast of the Strip. Do you know what that is? You're an air guy.
No, that is something I don't know.
Yeah, so circuits and bumps is when you practice cases where you're trying to land your craft and you have enough speed to go back up in the air, but you don't have enough distance to stop your aircraft by the end of the runway. So that's what they call circuits and bumps.
It's sort of like a touch and go is what we would call them.
So that was the practice training that was going on at that time. So nobody in the area claimed to have aircraft or know of any aircraft that was up in the air at the time. They interviewed a flight controller that had been around during that time. And he said there is no way that there would have been an aircraft up at that distance from the tower and they not be able to have it on their system, see it, and know it was there. It just couldn't happen. So either they weren't seeing light craft or the tower was lying when they said there was no craft there.
Or there was no craft there.
Right. So that's the two scenarios that essentially came out from this air traffic controller.
Well, if it was a really big cover-up, then that may be the case.
Could be.
But yeah, I went through all of the newspaper articles, and every one that I read was, they say, flying saucer mystery, the school is silent. What was it? I mean, everyone clamped down on this thing. That's one thing I found very unusual. So I think we're led to believe that, or what they want you to believe, the two girls went down, used the phone, called the news, and here's this big thing, and they all got really excited about something that really didn't happen, or it was a balloon. The headmaster just said, you are not to talk about it, and told all the teachers not to talk about it. Don't give interviews and everything. And so they kept it quiet, and they didn't want to talk about it. So on the surface of all that, we're to believe that headmaster just did a very good job of keeping it tamped down and keeping everyone in line and not talking about it. Not talking, at least to the news. Maybe they talked to their friends and family about it. But I still find it interesting that so many, at least, why did the police come and all these other ones come?
Well, that's the other thing that's really interesting, right? Because they say that within 20 to 30 minutes after the sighting, and this isn't just one witness, this is multiple witnesses from different vantage points, some that went to the school, some that worked in the area, young adults that worked in the area, claimed that within 30 minutes of the sighting, a military group showed up. Now, there's a difference in the stories in terms of the vehicles that are involved. Some say that 2 large military-style transport trucks showed up. Some say that 2 of those and 2 Jeeps showed up. Some say that 4 Jeeps showed up. So there's difference in terms of the types of vehicles. The uniforms are all pretty uniform in their description, pun intended. And they say that they were wearing some were wearing camouflage, and some were wearing blue uniforms. Australia at that time did not wear camouflage. Their units didn't have that type of attire. The only people that really did in military in those days that were allies of Australia would have been the United States Air Force.
Yeah, I was going to say the United States general military, the Army, didn't use camouflage, except in very special circumstances. This would have been during the Vietnam War, and they still just wore their regular Army greens. Now, there was some special forces that used some camouflage, and I think some French forces used camouflage as well, even back as far as the 50s. But I'm not a big expert on that. I don't know for certain. Regardless of the inconsistencies with the stories, one thing seems to be very consistent is that police first and then military showed up and began cordoning off this area to keep other people out. And they were instructed to keep it very quiet. I'm one to believe what Greenwood said, that these men showed up and threatened him not to talk to the press anymore. Why is that? Why did they come down here, cordon it off, and make everyone be quiet? I mean, to me, that draws more attention to this incident than if they would have just blew it off and said, oh, don't worry about it, kids. It's just a military weather balloon, which, of course, is their explanation for this. Now, before we get into the skeptoid part of this, I do want to mention, and this is brought out in the phenomenon, there was a man, he was a very young man at the time, 4 days before this incident began on Saturday, April 2nd, he took a Polaroid of a flying saucer that, to me, really looks a lot like the description of the same craft that perhaps they saw at the school. I mean, the way it's more cylindrical looking than, you say, your classic disc. Don't you think?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research on this. His name is Jim Kimball. He was part of a UFO group, so he was big into UFOs. He was part of, I believe he was part of the Victoria Flying Saucer Research Society, the VFSRS. That's a mouthful.
Are you sure that you're not talking about Peter Norris, the man that released the photograph that was part of the Victoria UFO group?
No, Peter Norris was the president. Miss Judith McGee was the vice president. The person who took the photograph was a Jim Kimball, Kimble.
That does say the member whose name is not available. I'm looking at the original newspaper article.
That's right. He actually did not want to be named originally. He did come on the record later, and he even talked to Andrew Greenwald and was the one who had alerted McDonald about this case in Westall and the student sightings, and also talked to him about his sighting and the photograph that he had taken with his camera. Now, there were a lot of people who looked into this, and it's really interesting in the sense of it's been suggested very strongly by some forensic analysts that it is a hoax, that the picture itself, you can clearly see delineations in the photo where it has been spliced together with another photo, and that the angle at which it was taken indicates that it was something that was thrown in the air from ground level. But there's also other forensic analysts that said, no, that's not the case, that it's a single. So you go back and forth with these experts, and
always.
Right, and I don't know what to believe, because I've
seen the photo, though, and I think the photo looks very good.
It does.
And I also think the photo looks very similar to what they described. It looks very similar to what the one witness, the artist, that said 2 were landed. He was a student at the time, and then he drew some sketches of them. I think they all look very similar.
I think you could make that case. So I don't know what to make of that. My skeptic side says that I'd have to look at it with a little bit more evidence and dig down into it more, but I find it very compelling on one side of the argument that you have this picture that appears just a few days before the Westall sighting, and that the picture shows a UFO that matches the description of a lot of the witnesses. One would say, right?
That was allegedly taken 4 days before.
That's right. Now, that isn't the only thing that happened in 1966. There was a lot of things that went on that year. A very famous thing happened in January that year with the Tully sighting. And that, I didn't look into it too much, but that's where this first idea of UFO nest, where you have this swirling pattern in fields, like a crop circle, I suppose, came into the spotlight for people in Australia. So it was something that was already in the popular culture at that time, and when they saw this flattening of the grass in the Grange, they immediately made that association with that earlier sighting in January. I don't know what to make of the Baldwin photograph, but it's certainly something that has, at least to some degree, some bearing on the subject. Now, also, there was another UFO sighting just about 2 hours north of Westall, where a driver was driving his car down the road, saw this craft go across the road, and as it went across the road, the lights of his headlights bent towards the craft.
That's strange.
So much so that the Air Force actually came, the RAAF, the Royal Australian Air Force, sent investigators out to look at the car and talk to this individual.
What about some investors?
Some investors.
They want to put some money into it?
I'd love to. Make some money.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Dork. Yeah. So
anyway, the RAAF sent some people out there.
Right. Isn't it? The Royal Australian Air Force. They're not investors. They're just Air Force guys.
Investigators.
I've been drinking, folks. Leave me alone, man. So,
the Royal Australian Air Force.
The Air Force people.
That was terrible. I'm going to edit all that.
This is a knife. That's not a knife. This is a knife. Dingo ate my baby.
So continue with your story.
Mate, you're a shark biscuit. I love that one, the shark biscuit.
Shark biscuit.
Shark biscuit. You know what that, folks? I'm going to tell you what that is, folks. A shark biscuit is a person who is new to surfing in Australia.
Shark biscuit.
And someone who is sophisticated at surfing or a pro at surfing is called a wax head.
Yeah, I know there are quite a few great white sharks, the largest living shark species around Australia. Shark biscuit.
Shark biscuit.
I
love it.
Love it.
My other favorite saying is, it's got a couple of kangaroos in the top paddock.
A couple of roos in there.
That means somebody's got a few screws loosed in their head.
Right.
So, yeah.
So anyway, continue on with the They sent the investigators that said someone saw their headlights bend around this phenomenon?
Toward this ship that had gone, this craft that had gone across the road from left to right, and his headlights, as he was turning left, bent to the right towards this craft, is his claim.
Strange.
Now,
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, so it's a sighting that you can look up. There was, I guess, the Victoria, what is it? The Victoria Flying Saucer Research Society has a write-up on it. They also had a write-up with one of the students, Joy Tai, who was one of the prominent witnesses in the documentary and since. We should mention that the Army personnel that showed up and was examining the location where presumably the craft had either came very close to the ground or had landed was being examined by military personnel who were using what witnesses presumed were Geiger counters.
Makes sense. Often radioactivity is associated with flying saucers.
That's going to feed into my skeptic side of the story when we get there. There's one more witness, which is the English and mathematics teacher, Hazel Moore. Eventually she married. Her name now is Hazel Edwards. And she corresponded back and forth with one of the researchers, Paul Dean, who's a researcher who's really followed the Westall story from the beginning. And her recollections of the day was that this really was just a hyped up children with overactive imaginations seeing these things. She doesn't take much account into Andrew Greenwald simply because he was about 20 years old at the time. It was his first year teaching. She always maintained that there was no UFO landing at the school that day. Two other former teachers agree with her, but none of them were outside witnessing the event. The most interesting development from the episode from her perspective was the community's desire to have a common, significant memory. She said it was a new migrant community, and the real story really lies in the successes of which many of the former students had made their lives. She seems like maybe a no-nonsense kind of person. She continues to communicate with Paul, and basically she plays down this whole idea that there was some kind of amazing sighting that had went on that day, and that because of that there really wasn't anything amazing that had happened. That's why the shutdown by the headmaster was so successful, because there wasn't a lot of meat there to sink your teeth into in terms of a story that could propagate in at least the immediate aftermath of it.
I think, though, there are always going to be people that were nearby. Maybe she didn't go out and even actually see anything.
That's correct. She did not.
I don't care, man. It could be right in front of you, and there are just certain people that will not entertain the idea of something that unusual. something as unusual as a flying saucer. So most likely this no-nonsense teacher from the 1960s was in her classroom while everybody else ran out, and the kids, kids will be kids, and they're getting hysterical and talking about they probably just saw an airplane or probably saw a balloon. She's not going to believe it. So, yeah. And I'd say they were hysterical. First of all, think of a schoolyard full of kids. Think back when you were in school. Kids just run around and scream, right?
Sure.
On just a good day, right?
And it was a very windy day, and she said that played into it from her perspective, that they were all riled up from a windy day.
But, it's a windy day. So let's say all the kids are out there anyway, the kids doing physical education. All of the things are going on, and here's this very unusual thing. Yeah, they said a lot of the witnesses said some kids were hysterical. Some kids were crying. They were scared of seeing this thing, and some were elated. And regardless, they were all very excited. All of these children were excited, and apparently some of the teachers too, just like Andrew Greenwood. So, I think they're going to get a few things wrong. It's been over 50 years. There's going to be details that are going to be off just a little bit. And I know skeptics, you read the skeptic thing and they want to point out every single little inconsistency. But the meat of the thing is there. The meat of the thing of some type of sighting, some type of object being there.
Let me push back just a little bit.
And don't forget the swirly things in the grass.
I'm not. But let me push back just a little bit. I think the narrative has to be looked at more broadly than just the students who were in the Oval who claim to have seen this extraordinary event and one teacher, because there's not another teacher who's come forward on the record.
Who was willing to come forward under, we presume, the same kind of threats that Andrew Greenwood received.
Right. Well, presumably only 3 teachers saw the object, and one we're not even really sure about. There would be Andrew Greenwood. There would be Jeanette Meir, who was the physical education teacher. Some say that Barbara Robbins took photographs, but we can't confirm that. And the other person, the English teacher that Mr. Miller says by the time he got out there, the only thing he saw was Andrew saying, "Hey, did you see that?"
Yeah, because he ran and grabbed the tea and decided to have a smoke instead of go see a once-in-a-lifetime UFO.
Well, I don't think he knew what his choices were at the time. I don't know. Maybe he sat there going, okay, your choices are go get your coffee and a smoke or see a UFO event. Maybe he's really into his cigarette. He's like,
well, it's like some guys are.
I don't care about that. But I guess what I'm getting at, it's very easy to see how there is this huge disconnect because of the age of the majority of the witnesses and the age of the people who didn't see it, who were adults who aren't prone to flights of fancy. I mean, if you're an adult working in a school and you hear a bunch of kids saying they saw UFOs and you go outside, there's no UFO there, and you're basically like, stop this nonsense, come in, let's get back to school. You can really understand why they would do that and why they would approach it that way, particularly given that it was the headmaster's first year. He's a by-the-book kind of guy. Even his children say he was very black and white. Everything was structured. He was serious. So this wall of silence makes a whole lot of sense. The reaction of the teachers, because they're not inclined to talk simply because there's really only one of them that saw anything. And he's the only one that talks maybe a year later. He does an article in the Dangle Donga Dougal Journal or whatever that, what was the paper? The Dingleberry Journal.
I like you trying to figure it out better.
It's like the Dingleberry Journal, where we crack cases open. we sniff out the truth.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to bring something up, not diverting as much as you think I am.
If it doesn't pass the smell test, we'll get to the bottom of it until they come clean.
Between 1956 and 1963, the British government conducted nuclear tests at a place called Maralinga. It was very controversial. Keep in mind, Australia is part of the British Commonwealth, even though they're an independent nation. So there were a total of 7 nuclear tests between 1956 and 1963. And the only reason I bring that up is because I am going to give you a story of a possible explanation. This story was published August 6th, 2014 by the Herald Sun, and it says an almost 50-year mystery when more than 200 people believe they had a close encounter with a UFO in Clayton, which is that area that Westall is in, may have finally been solved after newly unearthed government documents reveal a secret radiation testing program. Although federal and state government agencies refused to comment about the 1966 Westall incident at the time, it is now believed that rather than a UFO, what landed was an errant high-altitude balloon used to monitor radiation levels after the controversial Maralinga nuclear tests. So that was called the Highball Program, a joint U.S.-Australian initiative to monitor atmospheric radiation levels using large silver balloons equipped with sensors between 1960 and 1969. Documents held by the National Archives and former Department of Supply indicate one test balloon launched from Mildura may have blown off course and came down in Clayton South in a paddock near Westall High School, alarming and baffling hundreds of witnesses, including teachers and students. After hovering over the area, it landed at an area known as the Grange behind a grove of pine trees before taking off again and being pursued by several light aircraft in a sighting which lasted 20 minutes from 11 a.m. on April 6, 1966. The event has ever since been shrouded in mystery.
Yeah.
So what do you think? A runaway highball balloon?
Well, let's add a few more pieces to it that makes it a little stronger of a case.
Each test balloon lifted a 180-kilogram payload consisting of air sampling and telemetry unit in a gondola and was followed by a light aircraft tasked with tracking and triggering its parachute via a radio signal.
Yeah, so if we look at this in totality, first of all, there were other witnesses in the area of Clayton on the day who saw what looked like a silver object in the sky with a trailing pipe or a trailing rod of some sort. Now, the highball balloons were filled with helium using this rod, which remained attached to it. So that matches the description, wouldn't you say?
Yes, only that it's pointing in the wrong direction.
Well, I don't know about that, but I didn't.
Well, I mean, you got the balloon part up top and then it narrows down to the gondola where other witnesses said that it was the other way around. Of course, it was windy. That's why it was sideways, right?
Right. Could have been, right? And the military show up in a very short period afterward. There is no military presence that close to show up that fast to Clayton South around the school.
I've heard that argument as well.
But if you read the white paper that came out of the balloon launching station out of Mildura, Victoria, produced by the Department of Science and the Department of Manufacturing Industry for that time, and you go down to the section where they talk about tracking and recovery, it says this: a specially equipped light aircraft and pilots experienced in balloon operations are on full-time charter to the station to track balloons and cooperate with the recovery teams. Radar tracking of the balloons is also provided by the Bureau of Meteorology using weather radars and by the Highball launch crew using equipment based on the Raven track system specifically designed for balloon tracking. At cut down, which I assume is the time to take the balloon down to the ground, the pilot, who is in voice communication with other ground station and recovery teams, directs the recovery vehicles along the shortest practicable route to the point of impact of the payload and the parachute. If you paint that picture, you've got an errant balloon. You've got light craft who are on duty to track these things. Now, I think 5 light aircraft seems a little excessive to me, but maybe if they're very concerned about this balloon coming down and damaging property in a populated area, particularly around a school, you might have aircraft flying around at that location trying to down this thing using their radio-controlled activation of the parachute. And then you have teams show up on the spot really quickly after using radiation detectors. That makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? I mean, its intention is to record radiation at high atmospheres. So
not really, because the balloon itself is not radioactive, nor does it have any type of nuclear reactor. It's going to be a radiation detector that, I mean, if there's radiation around the area anyway, it may detect it, but I don't know that it would emit radiation.
I think if you're looking for a prosaic explanation of the situation, this fits pretty well.
It fits, but I have a couple of problems with it.
I do too. I do too.
It fits pretty well. It was a windy day. Maybe it got hung on that high tension tower, that electrical tower we were talking about, right? And then everybody's saying it was going, the thing was going up and down and back and forth. Well, it was stuck on the tower.
And then came loose and went back up?
And then came loose, went back up, and then either the pilot, I don't know that the pilot would have hit the parachute to make it come down, but for some reason it was forced down. It was a real windy day, what have you. Maybe when it got loose of the tower, it flew down and went in the Grange. By the time the kids got down there and stuff, it shot back up. It does not match the description, though, whatsoever of the witnesses that were close. Now, granted, they were 12 or 13 years old at the time, but still, 12 or 13 years old, that's not like 5 or 6 years old.
It was 12 to 16. So I looked this up because I wasn't sure what was going on there. Education in Australia in the 1960s ran primary school up to grade 7, and then from grade 7 to grade 10, which was required, compulsory, that ran to age 15, 16. And then you had two additional...
Most of the students aren't little kids. Most of the students are older kids, teenagers.
Yeah, right, exactly, from 12 to up to 16. So you have a wide range of students. And not only that, and this is where I'm with you, I have a little bit of problem. There's also people who aren't part of the school that are observing some of the event, who are 21. Some are adults who actually go to the site to see the landing location. And the landing location is really interesting because the majority of the people who saw it originally say that it was as if the grass had been pressed down in a swirling pattern and as if it had been broiled, not necessarily burnt, but also that there were 3 really clear indentations in the ground equally apart, as if 3 legs of some craft had descended and impressed itself into the ground. Now, if that is true, obviously it doesn't meet the Hubble balloon, but again, this goes back to my problem with most of these things. It relies on eyewitness testimony, and when you're talking about eyewitness testimony of so many people over such a great difference in time, 50 years, it's really easy for the original story, which may have had really mundane explanations for everything, get blown out of proportion over those years so that people elaborate and add to it.
Now, it's one thing to say, hey, what did you see 50 years ago? But then it's quite another whenever a lot of those students have a reunion every year and have been having a reunion every year for quite some time to get together and talk about it. Now, I get it. It's like a game of telephone. Everybody talks to each other and so-and-so said they saw it go up on end. And next time I tell my story, well, that sounded really cool. I'm going to add that to my story. Maybe even unconsciously I'm adding things to my story. I get all that and I agree with you. But at the same time, it was some kind of very unusual event, whatever it was. And a lot of people saw it. A lot of people got really excited about it, but then were told to be quiet and not to talk about it. Even the adults were told to be quiet and not talk about it, and not just by the headmaster of the school. So when you look at the newspaper articles that I came up with, all of them say the school's being quiet. Why? Why is no one talking? Why did the military not say it? I mean, okay, it's a top secret highball balloon. First of all, if it is what it is, and it's some balloon, I doubt it was even classified.
Oh, that is the other thing I wanted to talk about. I checked into that. At the time in 1966, the Hubble program was not classified and was already being reported on in all the major papers. So,
okay. So why didn't the military say we had a highball balloon stray off course? Sorry about that.
If I had to play devil's advocate, I would say that they were worried about the optics for the community, that they didn't have control over these balloons that they were launching, and that there was a potential for disaster happening in populated area where this large payload would come down on top of a bunch of kids. And they wanted to avoid that. That's the only thing I could think of and that's pretty irresponsible in my book because it didn't happen. They circumvented it if it actually occurred. And the responsible thing to do as public servants would be to put proper protocols in place to make sure it didn't happen, not to cover it up.
And then I could even see that where, okay, they don't want that to get out to a wider group of people. So they go around to the local citizens because it is sort of in a suburban neighborhood, and they go around to the local citizens and say, look, we want to keep quiet about this. We just don't want this in the news. We want to let you know that was just a balloon that went down. You know, you maybe have heard something. Please don't talk to the press about it because we don't want, and maybe the people around there, again, you said it was an immigrant school, a lot of immigrants. Usually immigrants want to go along with the government and be cooperative because they're trying to become citizens of this country. Am I wrong?
No, and
so I could see them going around and asking people to be quiet because it's maybe, like you said, maybe this thing crashed next to a school, could be some public embarrassment of the air.
Now, Judith McGee, who was the vice president of the Victoria Flying Saucer Research Society, I just like saying that. They took it very seriously, and they put out advertisements in some of the local papers asking for other witnesses. And it's surprising to me that it doesn't appear they got very many.
Well, again, like we said, this community appears to be made up largely of immigrants.
Yeah.
And immigrants are trying to immigrate into Australia.
And assimilate.
They definitely don't want to do anything that the government asked them not to do. I would say that if the government wanted to keep this quiet, whether it was a highball balloon or truly a flying saucer, that's why they cooperated. I mean, again, the big thing that just really weirds me completely out, if at the time they would have said it was a highball balloon, or even just used the good old adage, it was a weather balloon. If they would have just said it was a crashed weather balloon, but nobody said anything about this for many, many years. And it took some independent researcher to read government papers to come up with this explanation. This isn't an official government explanation for what Westall 66 is. This is based on a researcher named Keith Basterfield, who has spent years investigating unexplained phenomena in Australia, said a runaway balloon from the Highball Project was likely the answer.
Yeah, I read all of his materials.
But then when you read the headline, it states it as fact.
Well, newspapers, come on.
Was actually government radiation testing reports reveal. It's really one report reveals, or one researcher reveals.
This is one of three things. It's much ado about nothing. There really wasn't anything that went on, and most of it is just hyped up imagination from children ages 12 to 16 at a school. That's one possible scenario. It was an errant highball balloon that came down in the area, or it was some
aliens.
I ain't saying aliens. I'm gonna say it's some weird craft that they were experimenting on with the government. Experimenting.
Well, there's that too. So you added a fourth one. No, I don't. I don't like. I always hate that. It was a top secret thing they were experimenting with 50 years ago. Yet we've never seen anything like it since.
Yeah, that's not my favorite. As a matter of fact, I prefer the. In some cases, I prefer the ET scenario. Elliot. Yeah.
Well, whatever happened at Clayton South at Westall School in 1966, something happened for sure. And a lot of witnesses believe they are UFOs. I don't know that I have any other facts to add to this except one.
Oh, can't wait to hear it.
In June of 2013, in that area that was called the Grange, they built the town there, the Kingston. I think the town name has changed to Kingston now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Clayton South at the time, I think. But anyway, the Kingston Council decided to install a UFO-themed playground in the Grange Reserve. So now if you go to that area, you will find your own flying saucer sitting in the middle of a playground. And you can crawl inside of it and have all kinds of fun.
Yeah, you can't take that away.
You can't take that away. And you can't keep it secret because it's right there.
It's right there. Plain as day.
Anything to add to the Westall 66 case, Jimmy?
No, it's just another frustrating case for me where we come out on the other end of this thing and it's like, where's the alien ashtray, baby? I want the alien ashtray.
I like this case, though, with just so many. And what's strange is here in America, we've heard very little about this. I don't think I had ever heard of this case until the Phenomenon UFO movie came out that I can remember. They cover it a little bit, and they also, show that Polaroid photograph that sounds very similar to the object by the individual that was taken a few days before. But I found it to be a really, really compelling case, just with all the witnesses.
Yeah, so one of the interesting takeaways for me from this, while I was doing research, I discovered that this is not unique. There are actually several cases where schools had children who witnessed UFOs. Schools who had children and staff witnessed UFOs.
Mm-hmm. I know the one in Zimbabwe was one.
There are a lot of school sightings out there that include students and staff. And I found a couple in the United States. When I did the research, I found the one in Zimbabwe, which is made very famous because Steven Spielberg, of all people, turned James Fox onto that story, which he covered in The Phenomena. And then Westall, as well, is probably one of the most, at least top 5 Australian sightings. So, I don't know. At the end of the day, my skeptic friends out there, I'm with a highball balloon. That's where I'm putting my money. I want it to be saucers, sure, but I'm putting my money on the highball balloon.
I find it unlikely it was the highball balloon.
So you're putting your money on little green men?
Not necessarily. I'm not putting. I think that the highball balloon is just a big piece of speculation almost 50 years later, based on a few observations. Again, the secrecy surrounding it makes me feel like it was something unusual, whether that was extraterrestrials or flying saucers or whatever, maybe.
Yeah, I do find it suspicious.
The secrecy surrounding it makes it suspect.
Yeah, the missing film footage, the fact that you can't find any government documentation on this, any? Mm-hmm. When you have eyewitnesses, including adults, who say, yes, military personnel were on site. Even the staff that weren't convinced that anything spectacular was going on said, yes, there was Air Force personnel that came on site. I'd like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if the police show up, but it's quite another when the military shows up.
Have you listened to that James McDonald interview with Andrew Greenwald? It's hysterical in one point where they're talking about the Air Force contacting the school to have a discussion with the principal, and the principal tells the Air Force, hey, nothing went on here. Stop bothering me. Just like, and then James McDonald's like, yeah, they're a victim of their own smear campaign.
Yeah. Well, I don't doubt that at all. That guy had passed away several years before, but in the Shane Ryan Westall 66 documentary, his own children were like, he was black and white, like you said earlier, and he was very much about duty and no nonsense. And I could just imagine, I think about some of the teachers and principals I had here growing up, and I know the type. Yeah. It's just, especially in the 60s,
Yeah, and if you're running a school like that out in the boondocks, and it's your first year, and you're just naturally bent toward that personality of no nonsense, discipline. By the book. UFOs, I'm pretty sure, are in the book. It's like Chapter 3, Headmaster's book, UFOs. Here's how you handle it.
UFOs don't exist, period.
They don't exist. Stop that nonsense. Get back to class, students.
See flying saucer.
See flying saucer. See hypo balloons.
All right, man. What do you say we wrap this one up then?
Absolutely.
All right, so before we go, I'd like to remind everyone, please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps other people find the show. Don't forget to visit our webpage, CosmicSponge.com, and on there you will find all of our contact information. It's firstcontact@CosmicSponge.com. If you have a story to tell, reach out and let us know. We'd love to share it with other listeners on the show. And also we have Instagram and Facebook, and we usually post a few stories on Facebook. So if you enjoy reading UFO stories or Bigfoot stories, check out our Facebook page, because we post something on there every 2 or 3 days, every time some new story comes up. And sometimes we dig and find older stories of interest. So if you're into reading that kind of stuff, add us to your feed. Get UFO stories every day.
And if you want just a good quick laugh, check out our audiograms on Instagram. They're a hoot.
They are funny. Jimmy does all those. He has his very special take on the world or on our podcast.
Usually it's done under the influence of a bottle of Cabernet.
Yeah, he likes to point out mistakes I make or, goofy things I say. In fact, this will be an Instagram. What I'm saying right now will become an Instagram, no doubt.
Without a doubt. Hey, say something in French.
No.
Voulez-vous ce que j'ai avec votre ce soir? Say something like that.
Oui. All right. With all that out of the way, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and I'll catch you next week.
Jimmy Co. Ditto.
On next week's show, we have our very first guest. We are interviewing Les Odell. He is a real-life West Virginia Bigfoot and paranormal investigator, and he has some astonishing stories to tell. Be sure to tune in next week. I think you'll really enjoy it.
That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.